Hello, everyone, and welcome to the PARQA PulseCast. I'm Travis Webb, VP of Sales at PARQA, and your host for today's episode. I'm excited to bring you our first international episode of the PulseCast today, as we have a couple of our friends from across the pond, Holly Langley from Restack and Dries DeCoster from Chat Automation Limited, along with my colleague here at PARQA, David Steele, join us for today's conversation. We'll be covering all things automation, a little bit of AI, and I'm sure we'll cover the Oasis reunion at least once. I'm excited to cover these topics with our guests and allow them to share their experience and knowledge with you. With that said, let's dive in and learn a little bit more about our guests. All right, Holly, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your company and your background.
Hi, so I am Holly Langley from Restack, and I'm the founder of that company, which I started about 18 months ago now. Previously, I was the head of operations for a recruitment agency. And my real passion was the whole technology side of recruitment and the CRM and all of the amazing AI and automation that we can do within it. So I left my very stable job to go out on my own, and I now work with a variety of different recruitment agencies from 2 people to 2,000 people to help them navigate their tech, automation, AI, and their CRM so they can really see the increase of revenue and just streamline what they're doing, really. And I absolutely love that. I also, within Restack, have a product called Automation Station, and we deliver training, templates, and guidance to Bullhorn customers on how to use Bullhorn automation and navigate that and get the most out of it, because a lot of them just don't know where to start. So my tips and tricks help them every step of the way.
Awesome. And Holly, where are you based at?
So I live in a place called Reading, which is about 45 minutes outside of London if you're getting the train. So not far at all. For those of you not from the UK, it's kind of the other side of Windsor Castle. So you've got London, Windsor Castle, and then Reading over there. So I hope that helps a bit further.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. We're excited to have you here today and look forward to the conversation. Dries, let's start with you next. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your company, and I'm pretty sure you're neighbors with Holly.
Yeah, not quite neighbours, but yeah, we live in the I know the UK is small, but it's not that small. So I'm the other side of London, so we're in a place called Chelmsford, 35 minutes outside of London. That's where Chat Automation headquarters is. So like Holly, I'm the founder of our company, Chat Automation. We do 2 things really. Chat, which is conversational AI mainly. It's there to qualify candidates, particularly in the high volume kind of world, and help recruiters see the wood from the trees in terms of really, channeling through the right candidates straight into the recruiter's laps. And then on the automation side, we've got this guy here. His name's Dwight. He's our digital worker. So Dwight stands for Digital Work Interface for Generic Human Tasks. And he's really a digital employee, which staffing agencies can employ at a fraction of an FTE cost, typically to automate middle and back office processes in the areas of onboarding, compliance, VMS kind of timesheet automation. At the back end of VMS as well is typically where we work. Our clients are US staffing agencies and UK recruitment companies. They're the 2 focus areas. Typically 50 seats and above is where people tend to see good return on investment.
Awesome. And I know we're excited to talk a little bit more about Dwight as we get further in this conversation. That middle office, back office automation and the product you built is really exciting. So look forward to talking some more about that. And last but not least, David Steele, who's one of my colleagues here at PARQA, almost lives in another country. David, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Yeah, not quite Canada. Yeah. So I live in Whitefish, Montana. We're about 75 miles from the Canadian border. I came out of staffing. I was a marketing director, marketing technology manager at a staffing company, started using products, started trying to understand how the solutions would come together. And that's brought me into my role as a solution architect here at PARQA, where we're working with a variety of different staffing businesses of a ton of different sizes that are trying to solve their connectivity problems, trying to solve their experience problems, trying to clean their data up, and all of that to the good of solving business problems. So it's always unique. It's always different. And I think that the place I tend to sit is trying to make it all sort of pull together, right? Trying to take this and this and this and make those all connect in a way that's strategic and effective for people.
I think it's interesting. I think everybody on this call gets to kind of deep dive into different companies, whether it's automation, their tech stack, or whatever. And we had a client recently, it was probably one of my favorite quotes. It's like, basically, if our baby's ugly, we want you to tell us our baby's ugly, is what they told us. That's not the exact terminology, but when we think about automation, we think about AI, we think about technology. We come from a marketing background. We've morphed into more of a technology company, but even from a marketing standpoint, when you look at the staffing industry as a whole, I'd say prior to COVID and the pandemic, we were probably, I don't know, easily 10 years behind most other industries, and that's probably being nice. I think we hit the turbo button during the pandemic to catch up. But I look at even now with the technology catching up, when we talk about automation, there's obviously this shiny object out here called AI that everybody's paying attention to. But there's this massive opportunity for me, in my opinion, on the automation side that still is it's just there, right? Like we know automation's out there, but I still don't feel like as an industry we're where we need to be. So let's start off. Let's talk about kind of the current state of automation in the staffing industry. Like, Holly, let's start with you. Like, what do you see as you look at, as you work with your customers? Like, what are some of the common things you see of kind of that current state of automation?
So I see the main, so the problem and the scenario that I see is people have invested in automation, and they're either not really sure what to do now, and they've got something and they're going, what do we do? Or they've got it, but they're hearing stories because they're on webinars like this, or they've been to a conference or something, and they've realized that there's more that they can do, but they don't know what. So one of the best sort of things that I say to everybody is you just need to work out what's going to bring you the most ROI and is going to get you the most results, whether that is through revenue or cleaning your data. And then we can start to sort of extract the process and work out what is going to be a priority. But I think 2-3 years ago, this was not a thing. We probably wouldn't have been having this conversation now. This webinar probably wouldn't have been on, because automation, I'd never really heard of it 3-4 years ago, I suppose. But now people are realizing it. People are actually buying it, and the companies who aren't are realizing that they're behind. So I think there's been a really positive sort of change, but people still need the support and the guidance in what to do when, and then really how to keep going with it to get that, I suppose that flow going. So the systems are actually automating. And rather than just doing something that's not quite getting them the results, they need to have that focus to get them where they need to be, which is partly where I come in, and a lot of you guys do as well.
I think it's very similar to Holly, right? I always say to people, look at the business case first. Holly's touched on some of the revenue generating elements of what you can do with automation. Travis, you spoke about AI is all shiny, and certainly was and still is the kind of go-to. Everyone thinks they need to do it, but actually there are other elements sometimes around certain processes within a staffing agency's business that have remained untouched, where you can simply use automation. And I think for us, a lot of that sits again in that kind of middle and back office side of things. So as I mentioned earlier, always look at business case first. And what we mean by that is, what are the areas where you've got mundane kind of processes where there is one or more than one FTE currently doing the tasks, right? Where are you bloated, and what elements of your staffing agency are you bloated in terms of people costs? And look at those areas first and foremost to automate. And the reality is that a lot of these tasks most people don't want to do. So if you take them off those people, you can refocus them on the elements of the job that they enjoy better, which inadvertently also will give you higher staff retention. So we see it as a cost-saving technology, but equally, indirectly, it can have a real positive impact on retention of your staff.
Yeah, I don't know if the baby is so much ugly as just a little underfed, And I think it's kind of that question of who's in charge of the baby too, right? Because a lot of what we talk about is automation sits at a nexus, right? Is it IT? Is it marketing? Is it operations, right? Who's in charge of a data set? Who's in charge of caring for that data set? And I think that those are questions that have been asked for a number of years, and there's still a lack of clarity surrounding some of that. And to me, it's actually everybody, right? I think the word cross-functional is a buzzword, but in many ways, being able to get those three pieces of something together, where you have people from a recruiting perspective, you have people from an IT perspective that understand your data model, and you have people from a marketing perspective that can write copy that converts and, make graphics that are, the sort of presentation you want for your brand. Pulling all of that together is not exactly easy, but I think that's how you actually create that nourishment to grow something from an automation perspective. And that, of course, is not always easy, because sometimes you'll get factionalism going on, or these people want this and these people want this.
If I may, David, I experienced exactly this. So we had a great call with a US prospective client last week. It was CIO led. So call with CIO, and then on Friday, the CIO pulled in the COO, the head of marketing, and some other people. And where we ended up at the end of the call was, right, do each of you think there is such an area in your business where we should be looking at automation? And the answer was, all four was yes. And so the next step is now, one by one, we're having those conversations with the various departments. So to your point, exactly that. It's a business driven kind of tool, right? It doesn't really matter what area of the business it is, but I think it is important to find a sponsor who can kind of help connect the dots, certainly from a supplier perspective, like we all are, within the staffing agency.
Yeah, agreed.
So I think what's quite interesting is this, like, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, this was not a thing 3 or 4 years ago. So all of a sudden, the conversation around, I think we need to automate these finance process or this marketing process, or that may be the first time that people have even thought about this or considered it. So getting that buy-in from all the different parties and starting off smaller than going is going to be the answer. But it's an interesting one, because there will most likely be pushback and concern, because it's not something that anyone's ever really experienced. And a lot of them, this is going through it sort of time and time again in the future, but this time around, it's new for everybody.
We often talk about land and expand with our clients quite openly, actually, because that's exactly what we want to do, is find where you don't have that kind of alignment throughout a business. Let's find the one sponsor, the one kind of person that will really want to push the envelope. Let's do it in that area first, and let's prove it works. And then naturally, people will talk internally about, hey, have you seen what we've done over here? And then you get into other areas of the business. So I think, we all of us, I think, combine, and equally maybe recruitment agencies, think about where are your priority items, start with those. We don't have to do it all at once.
Dries, I think that jealousy is maybe the most effective form of adoption you can build, right? Somebody has something working great over here. They talk internally like, I want that. I mean, You don't have to fight an uphill battle.
So I think a lot of what we're talking about is strategy, right? And you think about it from the standpoint of, what's ROI, what's going to get the most ROI, what's the most effective, where do we have buy-in from? And that's one of the things that scares me sometimes when I hear talks about automation. And I've heard this from multiple people, but it's like, if you don't have 100 automations running, then you're not doing automation, right? And I'm sure for the four of us on this call, it makes you kind of sit back and take a deep breath, because if you're just getting into automation, you don't have a strategy, and your goal is, well, I got to get 100 automations running. Let's really talk about the result. What is the strategy? What are you getting at? Do you end up in a scenario where, I'm sure we're not the only ones that have walked into this, we have candidates getting 200 to 300 messages a month from different automations within a company, because everybody's just like, oh, I discovered automation. Let's put somebody in this sequence and let's just pop them in. And there's no governance around it. So I think it's interesting as we talk about, this as a whole strategy and getting buy-in and the business case. And it's not just the welcome to your first day, happy birthday, congrats for making it 30 days, right? Those are all fundamental automations, which I think are fine. But I think, Holly, to your point, like that's what it was when it first came out. It was like, what are the easy touch points? But now it's becoming much more strategic from that level of making sure that we're driving ROI. There is a business impact. It's making, we talk about candidate experience or client experience. how does it make that better and make your business grow? So I think that's where we've seen a big increase from an automation standpoint here over the last couple of years as it's grown. Let's talk about, so we talked current state. Let's talk about some of the biggest opportunities you see out there right now. If you think about, I know this is kind of a loaded question, right? Because there's so many opportunities out there as there are with everything with technology. But what are some of the opportunities that you see kind of immediately that are making an impact?
What I call a dynamic database. Historically, stuff has been uploaded to the CRM and it's then there forever. And hopefully we find the candidates again and that's it. And somebody who was available in 2017, you look at, and apparently they're still available despite having no note or no communications for 6 years now. But that's what it is. So for me, it's creating that sort of always updating. So we've got candidates self-serving by updating their CV, they're uploading it, or they're updating their categories or their skills, or they're telling us when they're available. So for me, that is really, really important, because it means when your team are doing candidate searches, rather than 100 people who are in that Boolean, you've got that 100, and then you've got actually 50 who are actively looking. And out of that 50, you've got 20 who have updated their CV in the last 6 months. So rather than having to call that list of 100, we can be much smarter about who we are calling and when. And that is then continually updating the database, which for me, I think is the number one single biggest opportunity, because data is going to be key. And I think that's going to become even more prevalent as sort of the AI and the automation grows. And I know like a lot of the automations and stuff aren't going to be working unless that data is there and if the profiles and everything are up to date. So to conclude my site, waffle, opportunity, dynamic database.
Yeah, so 100% agree with Holly. The term we use for that is progressive qualification of candidates, right, or requalifying candidates. So definitely agree with that. I think from our side, as I said earlier, a lot of it is around compliance, background checking, automating onboarding, and actually a big part of that is not just the ROI when it comes to kind of people's time and cost, because like we touched on, we've got digital workers that operate at a fraction of an FTE, so the ROI will be very strong. But it's also the quickest route to the dollar that we found, particularly in onboarding and compliance, because oftentimes we've got a temporary candidate over here or contractor that we want to place, but we have to go, or someone has to go and do all these background checks before we can place the candidate, which in some instances will mean there's a 24-hour delay to something that's automated and can trigger that immediately. So meaning that I can now place this contractor one day earlier, for example, which obviously means I get revenue into my staffing agency much quicker. So for me, that's a huge area. And particularly in the US, I've walked through offices where you have like a shielded off, most of it's open plan, right? But a shielded off onboarding and compliance kind of team in their own little fishbowl. And when I say little fishbowl, I mean massive, because often they are big teams. So that's where I see there being a lot.
Yeah, I think one of the opportunities that still exists is to recognize that I think staffing, to steal your word, Dries, is in a little bit of a fishbowl, right? We talk about like people haven't been thinking about automation. We've been experiencing the products of strong consumer experience for decades at this point, right? When you think about D2C, when you think about the way that people have been marketing to us from every angle for a long time, I think staffing in some ways can put the blinders on and be like, oh, this is our vertical, this is what we're up against. But the reality is my candidate experience or my client experience is actually a derivative of my consumer experience. And my consumer experience tells me that I can know exactly where a package is from the time I purchase it all the way until it shows up at my door. And when I see there's like a 3-day delay in that, I go, what's the deal? Why is this thing still, sitting in a warehouse in Chicago? So Dries, to your point, I think that either speed to dollar or speed to, just validation too, for somebody in an applicant process, they don't have that visibility in a lot of cases. So trying to build some of that visibility of like, where am I? What's going on in the process? And sometimes we find that even the simplest things of, something like a job turned down or this is where you're at in the process, just hang tight. The open rates on those, the engagement with that kind of email is astronomical because people want to know exactly where they are. And so I think trying to pull, when we think about the experience we're offering to somebody, trying to pull back to our own experience of what we like and what we don't like, and using that as the basis, there's a lot of opportunity in trying to compare that and saying, okay, how do we bring everything we're working on along to where, we're playing with the FedExes, the Googles of the world in terms of what that experience looks like and feels like.
We get asked sometimes, it's interesting, right? Because we say, hey, we do automation strategy and execution. And it's like, well, we got asked the other day by an executive at Bullhorn. It's like, what makes you different? Like, what makes PARQA different? And if you look at our COO, our strategist, and some of the folks on our team, we come from CPG backgrounds or big brands, right? Where automation isn't a new thing. It's the entire business. The budgets are millions and millions of dollars, right? This is the lifeblood of what they do. And then I think kind of, David, what you're getting at, then you come to staffing and it's like, oh no, we do automation, but it's still, those blinders are on. There's this whole other world out there that we're still yet to touch and we keep talking about. So I think that's kind of one of the unique things about our perspective when it comes to strategy is we have that background coming from these large, multi-billion dollar organizations where automation is the lifeblood of their business.
I think that very quickly, there's 2 points there, right? So I agree, recruitment runs lean in the back office, right? Much of the time. So I think that's part of the reason why for a lot of technologies, even though the workforce, whether it's UK or US, is such a massive part of the economy, but actually from a back office perspective, recruitment and staffing agencies tend to run lean, which is why I think you have this kind of laggard approach almost to newer technologies. But I think the other thing that's really important, which I've just forgotten, so we have to pause on that one. The other thing that's really important is it's actually automation isn't new. I had this conversation this morning, and Holly's spot on, by the way. It's not been a topic of conversation, but actually, look at software. Talk about Bullhorn or any other CRM. It's been automating a bunch of things for a very long time, but this is the next iteration of it, right? Where we're now talking about some of these, processes we've already discussed and automating those in and out maybe of existing technology stacks. But automation in itself is nothing new. In my opinion. I don't know what Holly thinks about that. But
I suppose you're right. It's always been there as long as the technology's been there, because the process of if this, then that has always been around. So if you upload a job and then you add a candidate and then you don't have to redo all the placement information because it's pulled it through. So it's streamlining it. And then you can automatically send that to a distribution list every time. So it's gone to your accounts team. So yeah, you're right. But we've just completely leveled it up now, and we'll continue to hopefully level up as the tech goes even further. My husband has been recently going for a promotion at work, so that he's been involved in like an internal recruitment process. And last night he was doing the application, and I was like, oh, here we go. This is right up my street. I want to see stuff from the other side. And he was getting really frustrated with it. And he was like, I'm having to answer so many questions. This is mind numbing. And at one point he turned around and said, I don't even know if I even want the job now because I've had to go through such a long process for these questions.
Wow.
And I was like, no, you do, keep going. And I was like, this is great because it's once again made me realize that sometimes, despite all of this, like, yeah, you could ask a candidate or a contact or even one of your sales team to do something a million times and ask them a million questions, but simplicity is best. And a lot of the automations and the processes that I drive, especially when it comes to like sending out candidates engagements and onboarding, is to keep it simple. Because if you bog them down by asking for every single bit of information so your database is perfectly clean, they're going to lose the will to live and they're not going to want to do it. So you've really got to focus on like what is going to add value and what do you actually need, and make sure that is the focus of everything, because otherwise they really lose interest.
And I think bringing together that point, Holly, and what David was talking about earlier, that kind of consumer grade experience, and that's particularly hot for us on the conversation AI chatbot side, is looking at, when I use Amazon and I have a return I need to do, I love that experience because it knows the order I've placed. I can click on the order, I can tell them what the matter is, and they solve it there and then. With a refund, do I need to send it back? Yes or no? And it's that kind of thing where actually candidates particularly are used to this consumer grade experience in the wider world. Yet when they have to do an application or they have to look at filling in answers to questions to get a promotion, there's just this massive disjointment between what we use day to day outside of work and what we use in the working environment. And I think automation's got a big part to play, and so does AI, in leveling all that up.
Here's a quick question for all of you, if I can throw one back to you, is what are your thoughts on educating candidates about the automations that are in place? Because I think a lot of people at the moment are like, yeah, we just use automation. We don't tell the candidates we're doing it. But what are your thoughts on an education piece around that so they know what you're doing and why?
I think it's a balancing act. It always is going to be. I come from just shy of 20 years in the technology side of things, and I always found it interesting, right? It's don't call me. Why are you texting me? Then when they need a job, they call you and text you, right? So there's, and that goes both ways, by the way, too. Like, I don't want that to be a one-way conversation, right? But it's, I think it's a balancing act. I think educating them of the fact that some of it's automated. I think some will appreciate it. I think some won't. I think it's that candidate experience side of things is a big play. And to David's point earlier, I think the messaging in general and just the way that it's done is that the strategy behind it is key for that to be a great experience. To Dries' point, you want it to be the Amazon experience, right? You don't want it to be the I'm not going to name another company
for legal reasons.
Yes, yeah, we'll leave that one out of the PulseCast here. But there's some of those you experience and you're just like, never again. Like, I'm done. This is a one and done, right? Like, you don't want that experience. So it's always going to be a balancing act in my view.
Holly, that's a great question, and I think it depends on what people want, right? Some people want a fast experience, right? So if you were to start a process and say, what's your priority here? Would you rather have a slower experience where you're working with a recruiter, or would you have a faster experience that's going to be more automated? Then you don't have to, then you're not necessarily running up against somebody's objection to saying, I don't want to talk to a chatbot, I want to talk to a real human, because you already know what their preference is. But the concept of having these bifurcated experiences where somebody's intent and wishes are being respected and even collected, I think that's one of the frontiers that still exists for us. Because if somebody wants a fast automated experience and the goal is for them to get employed or submitted to a job as fast as possible, then great.
Yeah,
I think in terms of and just one thing before I finish that up, I think the other thing is that it also kind of depends on the mesh between what's being automated and then where humans are kicking in on that, right? Because I think it makes sense to automate a lot of outbound communication from recruiters, but as soon as somebody is pinging back on that, that's where you want the human to jump in, and you need a response to jump in, and you need to do it with speed. And I think that's where essentially you're trying to pick up from whatever lower levels you're starting with, or maybe the top of your funnel, and getting somebody down funnel quickly and into those places where you're maximizing recruiter or salespeople time to build relationships. To me, that's where I think there's an opportunity. So in terms of telling people about automation, give them the choice. And in the case, I guess I wouldn't worry about it in the case of just broadcasting. Anyways, Dries, what were you going to say?
No, I would say if automation's done well, I don't think anyone would mind, right? If it's done really well, it's a great experience. But I'm not being overloaded to the point that was made at the top of this call. If I'm not being overloaded with lots of messages, then I'll be happy with that. And I think in certain scenarios as well, the staffing agency doesn't have a choice but to do the automation, because in some of the sectors, fastest trigger wins. So I have to grab and qualify the candidate there and then, or they're probably going to go to one of my competitors. So I think the key is in doing it well. David, I like your answer as well in terms of giving choice. I'm not sure that's always realistic, but then equally, if we're smart about what elements are automated, and then the human comes in for the elements where it makes sense, both from a candidate to the recruiter perspective and from a recruiter to the candidate, then I don't see a problem with it personally.
David, kind of what comes to mind is I think about preference, right? Like preference centers. We talk about that from time to time, but I think that's one of the things with automation, that there are some gotchas too, depending on the tools that you're using. And as you get into automation and the opt-outs, and are they universal? Do they get to choose what their experience is? Dave, talk to us a little bit about that, because I think that's an important element of automation that doesn't get talked about a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is just trying to respect people and what they want. Intent is the basis of so much of successful recruiting. Trying to hit the right person at the right time, and make all of those dots align, and that's not easy. I think that you have to recognize that. But to me, respecting what people want to get, giving them opportunities and to make those choices, and then recording those choices and making them coherent across your system. Those are easy things to say. They're hard things to do, but I think they're essential, because, it's not like I get messages from one side of UPS after I unsubscribe from the other side of it. You can have multiple different pieces of your tech stack that have email capability, and somebody unsubscribes over here. But if that doesn't translate across to over here and they're getting message, I'm sitting here going, what's going on? And so to me, it's like this company, this brand is ruining its own image because it's not coherent.
I was just going to say that's a really interesting use case, because we've actually stood up automations to do exactly that. Because often it's easy to unsubscribe from MailChimp and it will take you off the mailing list. But the reality is, within certainly middle and larger staffing agencies, there will be other systems that need to be made aware. So actually going into those systems, even if there's no API connectivity, to go and perform those actions to make sure, to your point, David, a day later you're not receiving a notification from a different sub brand, for example, it is a really good use case.
There are so many times I go into a system, and if I'm looking at candidate statuses or something, and it's that the candidate's first name is like, do not contact Joe, status available, or vice versa, or like they're not, they're still opted in. So whenever I sort of do some auditing with the client, normally at the start of the project, I'll go through and that's part of the data that I look at, so I can then kind of educate them and say, FYI, you've got 60 contacts here who are coded as do not contact partially, but they're all opted in. And this guy actually received a mail shot last week. So is he do not contact? Is he not? Let's kind of make everything one in the system, so you don't fall into that danger zone of messaging the wrong people with a message.
Holly, probably even worse, they would have had an email that says, hello, do not contact.
Oh, God.
And then...
Yeah. Honestly, I see it all.
Do not call and do not contact.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Holly.
Yeah, I'm with you. I see it all the time. And I totally get it. But I think, we really need to solve this. And hey ho, that's why I do what I do then. That's why we're all here, and to use automation to tidy all of this up.
Do not call and do not contact were nice names compared to what some jaded recruiters put in the system, which then got sent out. So I've had to answer those calls and manage that before. So there are definitely nightmare scenarios that can happen quickly. Going back to that data piece of it that we talked about earlier. I was just going to say too, as we talk about this of like the preferences and, how people want to be communicated with and respected. I think that goes back to, our marketing background in automation. We focus a lot on, hey, what is the persona of your candidates, right? Depending on whether you're in healthcare, technology, engineering, what does that look like? How are they communicated with today? What does their journey look like with your company? What are the touch points? Like, where do we need to talk to them and how do we talk to them? So that kind of strategy piece of it that we go back to, Holly, ultimately to answer your question, like that's the key. It's understanding who you're talking to, when you should talk to them, how you should talk to them, how they want to be talked to, right? It's not always everything we want to do, right? It's understanding from their end how they want to be communicated with and talked to, and continuing to, it's continuous improvement, right? Like it's always going to change. There's always going to be better ways to do it, and just staying on top of that and continually looking at that. And that goes back to my statement earlier. That's why if you're not doing 50 to 100 automations, you're not doing it, scares the hell out of me, quite honestly, just because that piece goes out the window. It's how quick can we knock them out and make them work.
That reminds me of when we were talking before we started recording. Holly, you shared about a client that called you up. Obviously, will remain nameless, but I don't know if you want to kind of share about that.
So I remember this. Sometimes just particular phone calls stick out for you. So last December, I was on the way to a client's Christmas party, and I got a call from somebody who I knew fairly well. I'd done some training for them recently, and the ops manager rang me and said, "Holly, help." And I was like, "Okay, well, how can I help you?" She said, "I've just come out of this board meeting with my CEO, and the CEO has said we need to go and spend some money on AI. So Holly, what should I buy?" And I was like, "Oh, okay, right." And I thought about it, and I kind of said, "Tell me a bit more." And I was thinking, what do I say to this? Because I don't know their tech, I don't know their products or anything. And it dawned on me. I was like, well, hang on, this is completely the wrong thing. So I said, "Okay, great." So I said, "Okay, the first thing you're going to do is go and ring all of your providers, your CRM, your phone system, your CV formatter, any other AI or non-AI products that you have, and then ask them, what enhancements are you doing within AI or automation in the next 6 to 12 months? If not, why not? What can we look for? What can we expect to look forward to? And once you've got all those answers, come back to me again with what you're still missing." And she was like, "Great, I'm going to do that." Needless to say, I never heard from her again, which was good for me. And I messaged her about 3 months after that and said, "Look, what happened?" And she was like, "No, we're all good." It turned out that their CRM was about to turn on a big AI functionality piece, which then solved all their issues. So she didn't actually need to buy anything else. The CRM already had it. And that is a classic example of kind of people think they need too much, and you think you need 50 to 100 automations, or you think you need to invest here. You probably don't. You just need to work out what you need and then use it well in a way that works for you and obviously your candidates, as we just said.
We've talked about actual automations, but as we think to some folks that might be watching this episode just getting started in automation, right? Or very early on in their journey, when you talk about kind of like I don't know if I call it the actual implementation of setting up your automation, but once you've got your automation attached to your CRM, thinking about where to start, from a basic level. Obviously, we're talking about some advanced automations here, but from a baseline level, where would you point people at to start from the beginning?
For me, it's what's going to get you a quick win. So that to me normally looks like your contractor is finishing in 6 weeks, 2 weeks, 1 week. Notifications to the sales consultant saying, "Don't forget to redeploy them." Lapsed clients, who have you not engaged with in the last year, but you've placed with historically. Again, I'm not talking about a 25-step automation here. You could just send a notification to your team or your sales manager, or even just send the client a quick email saying, blah, 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 "Hello, we haven't spoken in a while. Should we have a meeting?" Or something more sales languagey than that. But you know what I mean. So quick wins like that. Data, a job has been open for 180 days, but no activity, get that closed down. And then I would potentially start to look into what your biggest problem area is of the business. So if you need to get more jobs, look at all of your jobs within your job cycle. And if you need more candidates, start to engage candidates, get them to update statuses, find out if they're available. Now, if you bear with me 10 seconds, I'm just going to flip over here. I have a handy prop. So this looks horrendous. So I don't normally get this out, but I wanted to show you. This is, for me, a flow chart of the recruitment process. So over here, a candidate enters your database. They come through all of this fun stuff like interviews. Then over here, they get placed and they have post-placement check-ins. So there's probably 100 steps in that. So what I would then recommend, if you've got the capabilities and you love a flow chart, and if you need a template, I will happily send one over. I always then advise to go through, map out your process, then get your finance, marketing, sales team involved and say, what can we automate? We've got the systems now. What should we do first? And then you could almost use a matrix that is like low priority to high priority, low time to high time, and then the stuff that's going to be low time but high ROI, you start there, because that's you want quick wins, which comes back to the keeping it simple. But I think just don't worry about doing stuff overly complicated. But you'd be better to send out 5 automations that have one email in it, and that's the whole automation, rather than trying to create 2, 3, 4, or 5 automations that have got 25 steps in that can take you 6 years to get approved. So quick wins and keeping it simple is without a doubt the answer to where you begin, in my mind anyway.
I like that, Holly. And I think the other thing I would add to that is just, it's easy to understand where are the pain points for our business, right? Where do we need to change or tweak our business in order to make things better? But also listening to what candidates or clients have to say about their process. That can be a little bit harder to pull out, right? So if you're doing NPS surveys or satisfaction surveys of some kind, really combing those for the pain points. And if you haven't done it lately, I think it's remarkable how few people all up and down the management structure don't understand what it's like to apply for a job at the place they work. Like it's been months or years since they actually saw the whole process end to end from their seat. And so I would honestly say, yes, you can find some quick wins, but I would say really get into the shoes of your customers, of your candidates, of your clients, and see where things are painful for them. And then as you start to build out the kinds of schemas that you're talking about, Holly, which is absolutely critical, you have to have documentation of what's happening and what's going on, and you have to make sure everybody understands it. But as you do that and you start to think about that strategically, not only the business pain points, but also where is that being painful for your candidates, your clients, those other stakeholders that aren't necessarily as represented in that business metrics kind of viewpoint. Dries, what would you add to that?
Well, I think for us it's interesting because we do sometimes pick up where automation or CRM automation hands off. So we do have examples where there's a trigger comes from Bullhorn automation, for example, where we then come into play, and where we live really, again, bringing it back to the middle and back office processes, is really looking at what are those processes that are falling through the cracks of your current recruitment tech stack, where, again, you probably inadvertently have had to allocate people's resource to making good on that because elements don't talk to each other through the normal means of an API, etc. So again, we're back to business case first, right? Look at, hey, do I think I can save an FTE worth of time and money in this area or more, in which case I would say that's definitely something you should look at. I think earlier we touched as well on how, or rather we talked about advanced automation, etc. For us, it's not actually that complicated necessarily. We just screen record someone going through the process. Then we need to understand, can you give us login credentials into the various systems that Dwight needs to interact with? And then really we go away and do the build. So it's fairly light touch to get to the end result. It might take us a month or maybe 2 months complexity, but it's actually quite light touch in terms of having to commit resource on behalf of the staffing agency or recruitment company.
We've talked a lot about candidates. We've talked a little bit about clients here, but I want to dig into that a little bit more. And Dries, I think this will kind of lean towards your side, but I think of the client experience and what does that look like, right? And so obviously, Holly, you mentioned like the basics of the past clients that we're not interacting with, but using automation with your current clients. I know we mentioned NPS surveys. There's some other ways to reach out. But Dries, I think about your product and in the beginning, we talked a lot about onboarding, and I think about healthcare and locums and credentialing right. And all of these things that go into, particularly on the healthcare side, there's a lot of steps that there have to be done right in order to avoid some major, penalties. There's a lot of responsibility there. So let's talk about from the client side how we can use automation to help with that side of the business.
So, sorry, when you're talking client, are we still talking staffing agencies or their end customer, the corporates almost that they sell into?
Actually, both, right? Because I think, there's a lot of responsibility on the staffing company, but then also too, if you're a healthcare facility that's using locum tenens staffing, there's a lot of responsibility and liability that goes on there as well. That, a lot of these, it's been a very manual process for a long time. And I think that automation's coming into play to make a big impact on that.
Well, I think automation has two important side effects in a positive kind of way. One is around data integrity, which Holly's already touched on to a degree. But in terms of what you're talking about, Travis, as well, is actually making sure that steps in the process aren't being missed. So, with our technology, it's pretty straightforward to capture the whole process and make sure that 100% of the time, those steps are completed. And then the right information is going back to the staffing agency's client. We're capturing the right information from the candidate. And then obviously the staffing agency themselves are making sure that they've gone through the right kind of license validation or whatever it might be. So I think that's a critical point, because obviously anywhere where humans are involved, we all make mistakes, right? And the ball may be getting dropped. So, getting the process right 100 times out of 100, I think is a really good benefit.
I'm going to pivot here a minute. When we talk about the staffing agency side, I think maybe the better way to talk about it is, I feel like a lot of automation, or the majority of automation, is candidate client front end, whereas Dwight is middle office, back office processes that I'd say people talk about automation with, but up until this point, right, it's not been there hasn't really been, in my opinion, a great solution out there that can go in and do the things. I am giving a little shout out to Dwight right now. Dries walked David and I through this product a couple weeks ago when he reached out to us, and we both walked away going, okay, hey, like that's the next level of automation that's coming.
Yeah.
It's here. And so let's talk. Yeah, well, it is here. I'm sorry. The next level of automation that's here, but let's talk about kind of like that middle office, back office, the use case for Dwight itself.
Let's talk back office, right? Because we've talked about the onboarding and compliance element, but for any staffing agencies out there that are heavily reliant on VMSs, they'll probably be very, very familiar with the following problem statement, which is, if you are placing candidates through vendor management systems, then actually you need to at some point get the timesheet information out. And typically what we've seen is staffing agencies will have 20 plus different vendor management solutions or that they need to log into. Almost without fail, the login details per client will live on a Google Sheet or something like that. Someone has to log in and either download en masse an export file for a client, say out of field glass or something like that. Or for some VMSs, actually, they have to go candidate by candidate, find the timesheet information, export it, and then do validation to make sure, hey, is the rate that we've got against Holly, is that actually what we agreed with the end client? Do that validation and then put it into the pay and bill system. The VMSs seemingly are becoming increasingly more popular in the staffing sector, which is a good thing and a bad thing. It's a bad thing at the moment in terms of current way of working is, as the volume goes up of VMS placement, which is a low margin business, let's face it, currently my back office costs are going up as well. And so being able to automate that such that I can take on more volume without the back office costs going up or even reducing those is absolutely something that Dwight can help with. So it's a very specific use case we've come across, but without fail, anyone that has VMS exposure to some degree hasn't been able to solve for this, and we've been able to. So it's, as I say, a good use case for that.
Yeah, I agree. We I remember working with VMS systems, and to your point, it's they typically keep the margins and the rates down, but on the back end, it puts more work and more compliance and work on the staffing firms themselves. I sat in one time where they were trying to roll out, if your candidate made it to the start date and wasn't 100% on the compliance side, there was a certain dollar level of fine. And then if your candidate quit and you didn't notify them within a 24-hour window, there was also an additional fine that was possible to go along, which, by the way, the fines were more than the actual profit you can make during the term, which had been shortened of the can. So anyways, it never ended up taking place, but we had some interesting conversations around that. So
we've come across not only this being quite labor intensive for people, but also in some instances, they just go ahead and make the payment without doing the validation, because they're in the time window they have, which typically is a weekly kind of process. They simply haven't got the time to extract all the information and validate it before making the payment. So actually, they end up in a worse scenario where then having to claw back or retrospectively figure out the mispayments and then rectify that. So, it causes a heap of issues. And I think it's going to be a growing and increasing problem in the sector as I say, as more and more reliance is being put on VMSs.
Absolutely. Let's talk about scalability and growth for a little bit. As we think about everything we've talked about today, if you look at the landscape of staffing, so definitely some headwinds this year. You see a lot of M&A, mergers and acquisitions taking place. But as we think about the staffing firms and companies that have embraced automation, and we talk about scalability and growth, what do we see that those firms are doing that's just setting them, ahead against everybody else out there?
I've got a client, and they're a new business, so they've been going about 8 months now, and we've automated basically every part of the process that we think we can. So the human touch, qualifications, check-ins, feedback, offers, obviously that's all human, that's on the phone, but we try to automate a lot of it. And as a result of that, they now fill 100% of their jobs. So they're a really small business, but they are working on jobs, they're filling them. And I believe that that's a large part due to the automation that we've got in. And as a result of that, they don't need to be a 20 or 30 person business, because between the two of them, they've probably got enough. They're probably working for about 5, 6, 7 or 8 people due to everything that we've got going on. So I think businesses are going to be a lot leaner. But on the flip side of that, it's going to mean that the modern day recruiter needs to kind of be a data person, because they're going to have to review analytics and data to know who to call or what to do and when. And they need to be tech based, because they need to not necessarily build the automations if the back office team are doing it for them, but they need to understand what open rates, click rates, bounces all are, because this is now going to be a large part of what is going on. So the role of the recruiter is going to massively change. And I'm not quite seeing people put this sort of stuff into job applications or job descriptions yet, but I think it's going to be a vital part that automation and AI will become a fundamental element of what they do. And the modern day recruiter needs to be ready to embrace that.
I think what Holly's touched on there, we refer to as the kind of grow without growing piece. So actually, as you grow and scale, do I really need to take on more people, or actually can I use automation to increase our efficiencies, right? So when we talk about Dwight, we say to people he works 12 times more effectively, more productively than a human could, because he's working 24/7. So already, if people typically work 8 hours a day, that's 3 times more. And on average, he works 4 times faster as well. Hence, we get to the 12x. So there's that side. And by the way, he never calls in sick, so you never have to sort out holiday cover and whatever else. So I've not even included that into the calculation. But then I think again that the kind of time to fill is also important. So Holly's talked there about 100% placement, but actually, can I accelerate the time to fill? And I think where automation becomes really interesting, when we talk about data, is not just surfacing the data, making sure that data is accurate, but then actually taking on the actions that come on the back of it. So, if we have this piece of data here, and therefore we need to go and action this element, is actually this element being fully automated by Dwight or other kind of automation technology. So it's not just the making sure the data is there or is being interpreted in the right way, but then the so what kind of statement and actually solving for that.
Dries, I think it's interesting because I had somebody talk to me, this was a couple months ago, we were talking and they were saying, hey, we have firms that will go out and they'll hire 10 new recruiters, but they won't invest in automation. And if you've ever been in staffing and recruiting, the success rate or long-term employment of those 10 recruiters is not high, right? And you look at the expense to do that, and I'm not saying that, some of them won't work out, but the odds are against the majority of them working out, versus if you made a small investment, made the team that you had more efficient right out of the gate, you have
Correct.
gains, and then you can be more strategic about it. And I think Holly, it's kind of what you're getting at. It's not about eliminating jobs. It's about making the people you have more efficient and your business being more efficient. And that's the same thing with AI, right? Like, it's not going to replace people, but you have to understand how to use it and make yourself more efficient. It's the same thing with automations.
Travis, I think to your point, there's two elements to that. Look at your top 10 billers and how can you make them more efficient to do the stuff they do really, really well. So that's playing into what you just said and Holly's point earlier. Yep. What are the elements of the job that actually we can just automate? And then the second element to that is, how can we then take those elements, those automated elements, and use it for the rest of our recruiters to either help them if they're new in through the business, help them in their time to ramp, and get them billing quicker and more sooner, but also to take my maybe mediocre or lower achieving recruiters and actually up their skill set. Because then suddenly, if we're taking away a lot of that stuff, they can spend their time shadowing more successful recruiters, or spending time in terms of learning and development on those areas where maybe they need to improve. But typically, this technology can be used to free up the recruiters to do more of the selling, either to candidates or clients, right? And typically that's what salespeople are good at, is having those kind of conversations.
David, I know you jumped in earlier and you said data, and I think I think we've talked about elements of that, but we do see that a lot. In fact, we're working on some automation stuff with some other partners right now around data, but elaborate on that a little bit more.
To your point, Holly, like the way that a recruiter's job is changing, to me, it kind of falls into two categories. And the first is the actual data itself and having ownership over that data. Every time you are entering something in a central source of truth that then goes out to something else, or other things are built on that foundation, you are making the bed that you're going to have to sleep in later. And that's where, if you do not contact, if that's in your first name, then you've got a personalization engine that's jumping that into emails, that's going to go out the door. And so I think that I think automation can take people out of that middle. If you understand what's going on, then the data entry at the foundation is really critical. And then being able to follow up and build relationships off the end. And to me, that's where I see the job shifting a little bit. But that ownership of what exactly is in our database, what am I entering? Is it correct? How are my metrics built around that? Everything you can do to help people for that is important, but it's also just really critical that that's there, because especially as you do knock on the door of AI, if you're building AI off of a poor database, then you're basically throwing your money away. Yep. And if that's the thing, is like, if you want to get to that step, and we talked about it earlier, a lot of people aren't there yet, but really working hard to clean up your database and create that data ownership would probably be the place I would start, especially if you're trying to scale, no matter what you're trying to do. Because you can't build an automation blanket over an uneven foundation.
Yeah, and I would say too on that front, I mean, if you think about your traditional candidate databases and job boards, there's mergers, there's ones that are teaming up, the cost is not going down. You have agencies and firms that have been around for decades now that have just been stacking data. And I was talking to a buddy of mine who's part of a large national organization, but they did the exercise and they looked at all their placements, and then they went back and leveraged, hey, was it in our database? Did we go pay for it again? Yeah. If we did pay for it again, how much did we pay for it? Right. And I think he said 80+% of the people they placed in that time period were already in their database. Yeah. The average cost on the low end was $300 to $400. On the high end was $3,000 to $4,000. Wow. So all stuff that we talk about automation, the things we're bringing up today, being able to put those right programs in. Are you going to catch all of them? Probably not. Right. But even if you catch half of them or the majority of them, what an impact that is on your business, especially in a tight market, things like that. I mean, that's a big impact to the bottom line.
Huge.
As we kind of start to wrap things up here, let's talk about future trends and innovations. So this one's always a fun question because I think it's a blank canvas out there, right? We're just getting going, and we look at automation and AI and all of these things that are starting to come at us. I guess maybe you don't have to give me the full crystal ball prediction, but like, what do you see as some of the next things to come out for our industry to make a big impact?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the biggest thing that people are asking for, or I'm seeing at the moment, and this is probably out there, I haven't fully explored it, is like normally a video call is recorded. You jump onto a meeting, you've got 10 different Fathom, Read, and Firefly transcriptions. Now, what that isn't necessarily happening is so much on the phone, but therefore, if you're on a standard just mobile phone call with a candidate, that transcription isn't necessarily being recorded, then go straight into the CRM. But what would be amazing is if you can be having a call with somebody that it is automatically being recorded, and then whilst the phone call is still happening, it's almost prompting you to be saying, oh, don't forget to ask the candidate if they're interviewing anywhere else, or don't forget to make sure you email them over this. And then after that call has happened, there can be an automation that says, send the candidate automatically right to represent the job description and your details or whatever. So you've had the call, the notes are logged, you've been guided through the call, and then all the actions have been done for you on behalf of that. That would be an absolute game changer. I know there's parts of it, but I don't think there's that full thing in yet, but maybe one day.
Yep. So Holly, I can help you with. I'll put you on to someone after, but does the calls and the call recording and then goes into CRM. What it doesn't yet do probably is the prompting side, but I think that's probably just a matter of time. Funnily enough, it's very similar to the answer. Yeah. Funny enough, it was very similar to the answer I was going to give, but I was going to give it on the video side. So actually, as part of doing the video interviewing, those kind of prompts to look at and listen out for people's tonality. So I've asked this question from a candidate, and Travis kind of gave me this answer, which from a tonality perspective sounded like maybe I need to do a bit more digging into that, and then giving those kind of prompts, Holly, to your point of here are some of the questions you might want to ask. I think we need to be careful with things like AI, where there's legislation coming in where we cannot use elements of that technology to make decisions for us. But I think what it can do is obviously support us in our decision making, or help us with asking the right kind of questions, the right kind of prompts, which then in turn, if you take that through, not only during the interview, but actually could also help us as recruiters to then to the hiring managers go, okay, well, you know, we spoke to Travis, and here are some areas that came out of the interview that we want to make you aware of, because we think it's important as he comes on board in your business, that will help you get the best out of him. Or here are some gotcha areas maybe to look out for where Travis might need some extra support. I'm not saying you'd need it, by the way, Travis. I'm sure you're absolutely perfect.
I need all the help I can get, Dries.
I think what I'd point to is maybe the democratization of some of the capability that's out there. You know, if you look at one of the things that's really strong about AI as a whole, it's that you can use natural language to then create something that's far more complex. You know, you can say, write me a piece of code that will do Y. Yep. Right. And it might spit something out, and you still need to be enough of an expert to be able to understand what it spit out and how that would play with something else. But I think that we're going to start to see, as Holly pointed out earlier, there's this opportunity for people to build their own experiences. There's automation in a system about how something might move, but then how your experience that's specific to the people you work with on a day in, day out basis is created. One of the barriers is that you have to have some level of technical savvy to understand how to marry a data model into the actual build of something, and how it might go out and come back. I think we're going to see that increasingly more democratized, to where you can use natural language to then create things. This already exists. For example, in Zapier, they're running a beta test where you just type in what you want, and it will spit back out what it essentially the more complex version of what that looks like. So I would imagine that would be part of the future. But then again, as things get more democratized, there's still lots of little gotchas. There's lots of little small snags that can create large effects on the top of that when you don't necessarily understand the consequences of your actions. And I think to Dries' point, there's legislation around some of this, at least for Holly and Dries, they live in a world where GDPR is the law of the land, and that's what you're part of. In the US, it's far more Wild West unless you're operating under some of the state laws that are part of that. And realistically, we're probably going to go more towards that in the long run. So I think from a future perspective, trying to future-proof the way you do your opt-ins, the way you record those preferences, so that if eventually that law does catch up with you as a business, you have a backstop rather than having to bring yourself up to speed.
Yeah, I agree. It's the future is exciting and scary at the same time. If that makes sense. I think I shared with you guys on a previous call. I mean, there's AI tools out there now for interviewing for the actual the candidate that sits in your Zoom real time and answers questions for you and gives you almost like a teleprompter with scripts. And I think about some of the automation today. It's like, well, it's an AI written job description. Well, the candidate just has an AI written resume, and now we're doing AI interviews, right? And they got an AI bot on the other side that's helping answer. And I think there's that kind of middle ground there, that battle that's going to continue to rage on as it continues to grow. And it's, like I said, it's exciting and scary at the same time. So I'm excited about what the future holds. And kind of going back to the beginning, we've talked a lot about automation today, and I think there's just this huge opportunity that sits out there with automation. I think AI plays a big part in it, but it's that shiny object syndrome to me, in my opinion. Still, like, there's still so much work to be done here as we continue to grow and build the business. Before we wrap up, this is really Holly and Dries. I don't know, maybe David too, but a couple weeks ago, some big news out of the UK came out that Oasis is going to reunite and come back together and do a concert. And I have to tell you, I was watching the news that morning and I saw it, and I logged onto LinkedIn, and people love a good story, but I was shocked at the amount of people in the staffing world who had Oasis themed posts that day. So all of the takeaways, and I'll admit, I age myself here, 30 years ago in Gainesville, Florida, probably had a couple beverages and sang Wonderwall a few times during my college days, right? So I was a fan of Oasis back in the day, but is the excitement that real on the other side? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, but I'm slightly concerned that we've got another 18 months of this. In the last three weeks, I've been in probably 4 or 5 different agencies, and at least 5 Oasis songs have been playing every day. So I'm thinking, I'm all good for the hype. I'm enjoying it. But my only worry is by the time they get to the concert, or in a year's time when it will have happened, we're all going to be a bit sick of it. I'm sure that won't be the case because they're very talented. But people in my life and my clients are very, very excited, whether they've got tickets or not.
Yeah,
Nice.
I'd say when it comes to things like LinkedIn, any excuse, right, to take a post of what you want to say and make it relevant to something contemporary, like Oasis have got back together, ideally with a nice GIF. They were the ones that I saw. But by the way, not guilty on our part in participating in that. But yeah, Holly's right. There is a lot of excitement. Like you, Travis, I don't mind the odd karaoke song with of Oasis, but I don't share the hype of having queued for hours and hours. And there was a lot of backlash as well in terms of the what shall remain nameless, but the ticketing system that was out there really maximizing the value per ticket. Let's just leave it at that. So a bit of outrage against that was brewing as well.
Yeah, I think they tried
and the automation and the bots on the back end, right? They were getting all the tickets.
That's it. I think they tried to do some automation about some sort of like dynamic pricing that didn't quite work, but there we go. Sometimes you can maybe overly automate things. There we go.
Did Oasis kick AI out of the conversation briefly then? Is that what happened?
I think so.
The shiny new thing?
Awesome. Well, I just hope the two brothers are still friendly with each other in 18 months when it happens, because I know that's been the problem in the past. So, probably not, but we're here's holding out the hope. But
I think it's just needing to fill the coffers back up, and then they'll probably go their merry way again.
Love it. Well, I want to say thank you to everybody. I appreciate you guys joining me today. This was a great conversation.
Thank you.
I know when David and I were talking a couple weeks ago and, trying to get this episode together, Holly, obviously I came across Holly on LinkedIn on some automation stuff, going through that.
Was it an Oasis?
Yeah.
It was not an Oasis. This was pre-Oasis. But I actually attended I attended a couple. I know at least one webinar or LinkedIn Live that you've done. So I've really enjoyed that. And then Dries, I just learned about Dries at Engage this year. And then a couple weeks back, Dries reached out and said, hey, let's get together and talk. And we connected. And the next day, Dries and David and I were on the phone. And, I'm really glad. I'm really excited about the technology that you're bringing to the table. And I think, as I've said, I still think we have a long ways to go in our industry, but I think the future's bright. I think there's a lot of opportunity. And anybody that's watching this, that you're thinking about automation, AI, if you have any questions, I'll make sure that I include all of our contact information, but feel free to reach out to any of us, connect with us on social media. But thank you again for joining us today. And I really appreciate you spending time with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank Holly, Dries, and David for joining me for today's episode of the PulseCast. It was a great conversation around all things automation. If you'd like to learn more about PARQA, you can visit us at www.parqa.com. And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of PulseCast very soon.